It's my honor and privilege today to welcome you to the special Mamba Acquisition event. The organizers of and participants in today's event are acquisition experts. More importantly, though, they're passionate about innovation in acquisition to ensure our warfighters have the capabilities, training, and support they need for clear competitive advantage across the spectrum of conflict. I begin by thanking the organizers of today's event, Christina Corbett, Business Development Manager at Hodges, for her leadership and organizational skills. Bernice Cayo-Glenn, Managing Partner at Inove Group and co-founder Federal Innovation Ecosystem Map, for working with participants and agreeing to participate as a panelist. Ben McMartin, Managing Partner, Public Spend Forum, for hosting. Kaisa Chabersky for creating marketing materials and generating enthusiasm for the event. And Yanisa Perez de Leon, Content and Marketing Manager for Public Spend Forum, for helping us with registration and speaker management. Yanisa is also a founding member of the Public Spend Forum for Her, a women's group that uses mentorship and community to increase opportunities, mentorship, and community for women in public procurement. I also owe many thanks to my Women in Defense Central Florida chapter senior leaders, Beth Biddle, Senior Technical Fellow, Advanced Learning Capabilities, Mission Systems and Autonomy, Boeing Research and Technology, for her outstanding leadership as president of WID Central Florida chapter, and Chrissy Stewart, an amazing volunteer leader who generously offers her time and talent executing programs for WID Central Florida chapter. I also need to thank today's panelists who will share their broad experience and acquisition expertise. Michelle Hodges, Senior Contracting Official for the Army Rapid Capabilities and Critical Technologies Office. Michelle says she's not worked with Hondo directly, but he inspires her, particularly through his vocal support of innovation acquisition techniques. Because she worked on high impact projects without high visibility, she could implement different techniques to meet urgent timelines without burdensome oversight, but did not realize her good fortune. As she understood Hondo's messaging and leadership, she realized her small team was pathfinding solutions to overcoming bureaucratic hurdles, the same ones that Hondo was working to overcome. Seeing senior leaders like Hondo value and support a get it done mentality inspired her to seek opportunities to break deadlocks on a larger scale, taking her to Army Future Command and Rapid Capabilities and Critical Technologies Office. Anne Laurent is the Director of Professional Practice and Innovation at the National Contract Management Association. Anne tells me Hondo has been one of her heroes since his time at SOCOM. Anne was amazed by SOFWORX and the idea of serendipitous collisions among people and ideas from a vast array of sources. She admires his candor and is grateful for the top cover and inspiration he provides to acquisition innovators. Bernice Cayo-Glenn, Managing Partner at Inove Group and co-founder of the Federal Innovation Ecosystem Map, is a key player in this entire event. Bernice met Hondo when she joined an OT Consortia manager team in 2015. Hondo took the time to meet her at SOFWORX and at subsequent events, mind mapping how the WORX franchise might develop within tribal lines while promoting cross-cutting collaboration. He imparted an ethos of trying new approaches quickly and without a sense of exclusivity that often stifles collaboration. He modeled for the rest of the team this important premise. Branding is usually very exclusive and must be done, but it does not and should not preclude collaboration. His SOFWORX approach to industry outreach via off-post sites has become a best practice, and she clearly remembers that first moment when she pulled into an open parking lot across from SOFWORX or the DroneWorks site. Hondo generously provided invaluable accessibility professionally, as well as sharing his lessons learned. And that leads me to a very special thanks to the Honorable James Hondo Geurts, Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, not just for taking time out of his incredibly busy schedule, but for his dedication and mentoring and advocating for smart, talented, aggressive women working in defense acquisition. And now I'll turn it over to our moderator for today's event, the Managing Partner for Public Spend Forum, Ben McMartin.
Rachel, thank you so much. Great insight, great remarks, great input from our panelists who we'll hear from later, discussing how they've got after the acquisition solution problem set themselves and how they've leveraged some of the leadership in doing that, and especially with Secretary Geurts. So I was asked to moderate this thing over a year ago. All right, it's been a long year. So about a year ago, I got a LinkedIn message from Christina Corbett at the WID Central Florida chapter saying, hey, Ben, would you like to moderate something called Mamba Acquisition? And so it is in my nature to, of course, say yes, and then later figure out what the heck that means. And so I said, of course I would. And then I had to go figure out what Mamba was. And so the good news is I figured out that Mamba mentality it was a philosophy and a work ethic of the late great Kobe Bryant, basketball player for Los Angeles Lakers. I am not a Lakers fan. I am a Detroit Midwest Pistons fan. Thank you. But I learned a lot from Kobe Bryant's Mamba mentality. In fact, over the year, I bought Mamba mentality and spent some time reading Mamba mentality and thinking about it from an acquisition context and what the crossover, pun intended, is between the hardwood and acquisition world. And there are a number of lessons to be taken from this: teamwork, personal courage, hard work, and dedication. But the one that really stuck out to me that aligned to the theme that we're going to talk about today is this quote that you see on the screen right now, which is, Kobe stating, when it came to basketball, he had no fear. There were going to be skills that he was going to have to learn that he didn't know to take his game to the next level. And realizing that, he would dive right into them. And so there was no fear in trying out a new technique. His mindset was, eventually I'm going to have to know how to use this technique. So there's no better time than the present to just start working on it. He realized, hey, I focused on the fact that I had to try something, get it done. I had to have it in my arsenal. If the price was a lot of work and a few missed shots, so be it, right? And so from an acquisition context, that is really a good snapshot of the world we're in today. There are a number of new skills that the acquisition professional is going to need. There are a number of pivots the acquisition professional is going to have to make when they think they've learned the next thing. And guess what? There's something else that they have to learn. And in this environment, the mentality has to be that you just have to dive in and go for it. And the folks that you're going to hear from today, starting with Secretary Geurts, have that mindset of just diving in immediately, trying the new thing, seeing what works, being agile and ready to pivot if it's not going to work out for you, and being okay with, taking some lumps. Everything's going to take some hard work. Everything's not going to work out. But if you don't try it, you'll never know. And you'll never add it to your arsenal and your toolbox. And so I'm really excited to talk about the Mamba mentality, how it applies across acquisition today. We couldn't have a better panel. We couldn't have a better keynote speaker. I think we've heard enough from me. And so now you've heard all the great things that we heard about Hondo before, but I'm going to give you the official, because, it's important to understand these people are officials, right? And so Hondo has quite a background.
Don't grasp defeat here too early.
So I took 8 pages off of the bio, and I'm just going to stick to a couple paragraphs because it's deep. But the most important thing you need to know is Jim Hondo Geurts was sworn in as Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, following his confirmation by the Senate in November 2017. As the Navy's acquisition executive, Mr. Geurts has oversight of an annual budget in excess of $60 billion. So for the industry partners, they just woke up, right? $60 billion. Is responsible for equipping and supporting the finest sailors and Marines in the world with the best platform systems and technology as they operate around the globe. Mr. Geurts previously served as the acquisition executive, U.S. Special Operations Command at MacDill, which is the first time that I got to interface with Hondo, where he was responsible for all Special Operations Forces acquisition, technology, and logistics. In that position, his innovative leadership and technological ingenuity provided rapid and affordable acquisition that positively impacted SOCOM acquisition workforce, and I have seen that firsthand, and the Special Operations Forces capability on the battlefield. Overall, Hondo has 30 years of joint acquisition experience and served in all levels of acquisition leadership positions, from acquisition executive, program executive officer, program manager, and major defense acquisition programs. And so without any more bio and any more delay, I would like to introduce you to Secretary Hondo Geurts.
All right, Ben. Hey, thanks a lot, and appreciate that. And I think I can't remember the exact quote, but it was smart, aggressive, talented, women leaders is probably the best 4 or 5 word description I've heard of the folks you're going to hear after me. And so I'm honored to be in their company, and I'm sure you will get a lot from their experiences and perspective. And what's nice is they've all been successful, but in kind of different dimensions that are all related. And Ben, thanks always for your energy and enthusiasm and inspiration here. Hey, spoiler alert, I am not going to talk for 40 or 45 minutes and then leave 2 or 3 minutes for questions. Probably a little bit in reverse, because I really want to kind of go where you guys want to go, and provide any perspective I can from the many times I have failed on the path of wherever I am right now. I think a couple things that, when I think about the acquisition world we're heading into, that kind of come to mind. I mean, we can talk processes and contract types and all that other kinds of stuff, and that's all interesting. But without a good, talented workforce in the right culture, process doesn't matter. And if you have the right talented workforce in the right culture, the process kind of doesn't matter. They're just tools to get you along the way, and the right culture and people will create the tools they need, or leverage the ones they have. So my comment's going to be maybe a little bit higher level, but I'm also happy to kind of dive into the some more of the nuts and bolts pieces. But when I look at the challenges we're going to face going forward, I think of a couple different terms. Many of you have heard me say we've got to be multi-dexterous. And to be when I say multi-dexterous, it means we've got to be able to be good at a lot of different things. And so, it was really interesting for Air Force turned special ops guy to be in charge of building ships. You could see that, hey, some of that experience might be relevant, some wouldn't. And that might be true from a process standpoint, but this idea that there are things that we need to do that are complicated, complex, and the price for failure is very high. There are other things we need to do where not being rapid, agile, innovative, taking lots of shots, accepting failure, and the price for not doing that is high. And I think where we're all maturing to is it's not one versus the other. And, we don't have to do everything at the speed of SOCOM or everything at the speed of aircraft carriers. We've got to do things at the speed that's right for the job that's at hand. And we need talented people who are talented across that whole spectrum. And so there are places where, we as leaders absolutely need people who are very detail oriented, can look at things and create programs with very high confidence of execution. There are other areas where we need people who are not satisfied with status quo, that want to challenge everywhere. And then we need people who can take the best out of both of those worlds and meld them together in a good strategy. And that's people on the government side, that's people on the uniform side, that's people on industry, small business, and all that. And where we failed in the past is we've kind of either gone one or the other, or tried to bifurcate those into kind of unique stovepipes of excellence. And where we see really, I think, tremendous progress is when we can put out a wide array of tools, empower our workforce, and inspire them to use those tools, and then create at the senior leadership what I'll call the 18-inch neck obstacle removal process to get things out of their way. And that's where I think we've been successful. If being multi-dimensional, multivariant, being adaptable is what we need to do, then the only way we're going to be able to do that is with a diverse group of people doing it. And again, diverse in this is who you are, race, gender, background, what do you know, what are your skills, and who do you know? And to be successful with kind of this, hey, we got to be very adaptable, we got to be very resilient, we've got to be able to adapt and build lots of different programs. We need the talent that's diverse, but most of all, we need a culture that respects that across all the different lines. and seize opportunity by putting different pieces together in different ways. You know, most innovation, overused buzzword, is really when you put two things together that you didn't think would naturally match. My favorite example is artificial Christmas tree, which was actually invented by a toilet bowl scrubber company, who looked at a toilet bowl scrubber and they said, well, if I just cut the end off, I can make an artificial Christmas tree. And then they stacked up a bunch of toilet bowl scrubbers with ends cut. You would have never thought toilet bowl scrubber and artificial Christmas tree would have gone together, but from that is an opportunity. So this idea that we need to not overly weight an individual's expertise, but more so weight their ability to work across boundaries, bring something to the table. That something could be their unique intellect. It could be their networks. It could be their spirit. It could be a lot of things. When we can do that, amazing things happen. When we don't do that, not very amazing things happen. And so what's, I think, been inspiring for me over the last couple of years is this idea that it's not just a process. It's much more, we need to train people on how to have as much in their emotional intelligence as a mathematical intelligence or contracting intelligence. You need experts, but if they aren't in an environment where they can move across boundaries, we're not going to get there. Because we've all suffered we call it valley of death. It's kind of an impedance mismatch. If you're trying to get a project through from idea to fielding, every time you go through a new population, new group, a whole nother set of questions, and we just kind of can't get there from here. Your Department of Navy, I think, is moving out. I laughed a little at the number. This last year, we put $148 billion on contract last year. What's interesting about that was about 20% more than we did the year before, about twice as much as we did 2 years ago. And we did it with twice 20% more output with 10% less contracts. And so what we're seeing, and in the middle of COVID, oh, by the way, and we broke every one of our small business records. So if you would ask me, I'm kind of a betting aggressive person. If you would ask me in January, hey, you're going to have a telework workforce, 95% telework, and you're going to get 20% more output. You're going to do it with 10% less effort, and you're going to break all of your small business goals. I mean, I'm an aggressive, risk-taking person. I'm not sure I would have taken that bet. But what it does show you is if you can create the right foundation of trust, of create relationships before you need them, work across these boundaries, whether it's government to industry boundaries, prime to sub, all the different things, and then kind of inspire teams and enable them to go out and do things you haven't even thought to ask them to do. Pretty freaking amazing things can happen. And so, it's not lost on me how impressive that is for a large organization to do. Again, I think a key to that, though, achieving that is this very strong foundation. I've had a great chance to learn, this whole idea of diversity, there's a whole social reason to do it, but much more important than just the social is there's great skills out there, and we do not enable a full utilization of everybody's skill set. And so, when I think of what forums like this bring folks together from different perspectives, different networks, different views, different experiences, it's really important. Hey, look, when I think of, for those who are kind of emerging leaders out there or folks that, want to continue to crush it going forward, I don't care where you are, you're a contributor, just as much a contributor if you're in industry, if you're in a small business, if you're in a lab, if you're in a consortium, or if you're in a program office or here in a five-sided wind tunnel. I see three traits that when I think of folks I've either worked for, worked with, learned with, or believe have the greatest potential. They have really kind of three core traits. One of them is a curiosity to explore, kind of an outward focus. Never, I always call myself positively discontent. You know, you're positive, but you're not content, right? But you've got this curiosity to explore and get outside and take a best practice or whatever that is. The second thing is humility to learn and recognizing that there are folks out there who have done something. And, you know, I'm a fan of rip off and deploy is the best R&D. The fastest way to get something is steal it from somebody who already has it. But you've got to have humility to go off and do that. And easy to say, we're all humans. We all have egos. We have organizational egos. And then the last one is you got to have the boldness to try. And what I see from the three panelists here, what I see from Ben and all of the thems that they represent out there are those three traits. They're curious. They work across normal lifelines. They get outside of their own organizational things. They want to hear what people are doing, even if it isn't evident at the beginning what the value is. They like learning. And then they're bold and they'll go try things. So I think we as a community serving our sailors, airmen, soldiers, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, civilians, whomever, we owe that to the country. We owe it to always be doing that. If we can do that at scale, then everything else is easy because we'll figure out the right process and we'll figure out the best one for the job and we'll learn which one's the best one to use. We'll create the muscle memory. We'll get the sets and reps in and stuff. If we can't do that and we're relying on a golden fire clause or something like that, then we're not going to get there. We've got to, you know, part of the reason I think COVID has been, you know, terrible on so many dimensions, but enlightening in a few, is because it's helped draw back some of that mutual respect that industry isn't out there just to go milk the government dollar and make outrageous sums of money. And government guys and gals aren't all stupid people that couldn't get a job in industry. And government can do things in a crisis that can really help industry, and industry can do things that really help the government. I tell everybody, we did not shut down a single shipyard, private or public, in all of COVID. And if you think about the conditions in a shipyard of hundreds of thousands of people in close contact, and that was not just sailors. I mean, that was government folks, that was in industry and all that. That's pretty remarkable. We did some things on the government side to help industry out in their time of need. Industry did a lot of things to help the government out in their time of need. So as we go forward, you know, returning to where we were a year ago this time is complete mission failure from my perspective. We've got to figure out those things that we have learned, that we've built, that we've been getting sets and reps in. That becomes a new baseline, because that then, where we've got this mutual respect, we understand what everybody can bring to the table. We leverage diversity in all of its faces and factors. That will enable us to be the adaptable, resilient, high-performing organization we need to be. And then we can kind of stop ignoring all the self-talk that's caused us to not see those opportunities in the past. And then leverage this idea of many voices, create a better product, multiple dimensions, enable us to go forward. With that kind of mission focus, then that will allow us to move past some of these barriers we put in front of ourselves, whether they're procedural or unconscious bias or all the other kind of things that are out there that cause us to self-optimize. I think what you're going to hear from the panelists following me is, I think, you know, they're going to say their journey in there. I'm a little bit ashamed at any credit I get for any of that. Please don't give me any of that credit. I'm just a big guy with a big neck trying to move things out of the way. So folks like them or you out there in the audience can move. That's what you should expect out of your leadership. You know, make holes for you and let you run. Two things have to happen. You got to let them know where you got obstacles, and you got to be ready to run. And again, if we can do that together, then I think, you know, we can get to the point where we all see now, we can feel it, we can sense it. We've just got to keep the determination to get there. So Ben, with maybe that is some, maybe just kind of opening comments. I'd love to take some questions or hand it off to these awesome panelists here who will be much better spoken about this than I am.
Well, we do have some questions, and I think in line with your opening comments, I'd like to start a little broader, and then we'll narrow a little bit. and get a little bit in the weeds. Right out the gate, I want to tap into one of the themes that you had, which is really curiosity, multidextrous, working across, diverse communities. And of course, today we're here with Women in Defense and National Defense Industrial Association. And so I really want to talk about that government industry interaction. And so I'll set you up a little bit with a little bit of talking points here, which is in October of 2018, my former commanding general, Major General Cedric Wins of RDECOM, now CCDC, was quoted in National Defense, and he stated, "Collaboration is extremely important. We have to figure out ways to work with our industry partners to explain our military problems and figure out what they can do for us." That theme has carried through in all the strategies we've seen in the last 2 years, whether it's the defense digital strategy, which states, as we modernize our digital environment across the department, we must now recognize more than ever the importance of collaboration with industry and academia. The National Strategy for Critical and Emerging Technologies, again, promoting national security innovation base requires a sustained long-term investment in collaboration between government, academia, and the private sector. And the most recent one, the National Space Policy, 17 times uses the phrase, "We must stress the importance of collaboration with industry, academia, and our allies." That's great. Collaboration is a great term. The question is, well, how do we define collaboration? There's no definition of collaboration in any of these articles. So for your perspective, how would you define this collaboration, and what are the effective attributes of that collaboration?
Yeah, so I think, again, I'm a little worried collaboration is going to become the new innovation, which is kind of the new, it's everything to everybody, so it's kind of nothing to nobody. I personally like the term agility because I can kind of measure that and I can understand how you can create agile processes and communities and all that. And then a facet of that in terms of collaboration is, to me, collaboration is bringing as diverse a set of folks together you can to solve a problem. And then the second element of it is in getting together before you need to. So, one of the things when I kind of put softworks together, I had this concept of pre-planned serendipity. I don't know what awesome things are going to happen when, we get Rachel, Bernice, and Ann together. I just know if the three of them get together, something awesome is going to happen. And the awesomeness is multiplied by the diversity of the group. And so where we create surface area and we make it easier to talk about our problems, not our requirements, and industry has an ability to talk about their opportunities, not products, then I think you start to illuminate things you would have not naturally seen. Because if it's a transactional piece, that's generally where we fail. Transactional processes tend to be inefficient and not very adaptive. So I think what collaboration allows us to do is much more integrated processes and illuminate it. We have to break down this perception. If a government person talks to an industry person, they can never do business again for the next 40 years. It's ridiculous, the things we put in our place. And when I was at SOCOM, we actually did training on how to talk to contractors during source selection, because we got in this mode that nobody could talk to each other during a source selection. And so over 9 months, we were like two trains going off in different directions, and neither side. And again, I kind of go back to this mutual respect. And I'll tell one of my stories. We had one of our teams, and it was, like the Monday before Thanksgiving, and they came in and said, "Well, we're not going to be able to get our ENs out. We're going to wait. We need to wait for 2 weeks." And I'm kind of picking at that a little bit. I said, "Okay, have you talked to contractors about it?" "Oh no, we're not going to tell them." I'm like, "Okay, well, they're all sitting around their computers waiting for your ENs and ruin their Thanksgiving, and now you're going to ruin their Christmas. How about we just tell the contractors they're not going to get ENs for 2 weeks?" Well, that would be giving them an unfair competitive advantage. I'm like, and it wasn't that the government folks were trying to be, they were insensitive. They just didn't know. Most of the protests I've seen have come about because we didn't communicate the right way during a source selection. And if I was on the other side, I would be, okay, you haven't talked to me in 9 months and I get this and you give me no debrief, give me a break. And so that's where I think about where collaboration really becomes, and you can do all that while, and I would submit we can actually improve the acquisition integrity by having more effective communication. And we can identify opportunities. Now, my last piece I would say, where I say we're still lacking, is we are a bit over infatuated with discovery, and we are completely underperforming in deployment. And so we've got to, it's not just good enough to identify an opportunity or technology or something. We've got to have a pipeline that allows that to get to the field, because we are still not getting innovation to the field at scale. We're discovering at scale, and then you're almost doubly frustrated because not only do you not have what you want in the field, you can actually see it and it's not in the field. So where we've got to work together and collaborate is how do we work a process that gives us that whole pipeline from discovery all the way to deployment, and not just have a, pick your thing where we discover a lot of stuff, but to the operator in the field, we haven't done anything for them. That's where I still think we have opportunity, Ben. All
right, and so I'm gonna keep one more at a high level. So we're gonna go with I see we have a question from Liz Bryant. If this is the Liz Bryant I'm thinking of, she is one of my favorite contracts professors from Defense Acquisition University. Maybe it's a different Liz Bryant. And her question was, as DoD acquisition continues to evolve, what are the top 3 challenges you would consider most pressing for our next 5 years?
I think we have got to continue to think about talent development in a different way and get away from just, what skill do you have versus what talent do you have? And I think that's a group thing. That's not just a government thing. And so we've really got to focus on talent. The second challenge is kind of what I alluded to. We've got to get a pipeline all the way to the field, not just a pipeline to a prize challenge or some other kind of front end piece of things. For those things that can get to the field, we've got to pipeline them all the way through as efficiently as possible. And then I think the third thing we have to do is we've got to create an approach, whether that's a business architecture, technical architecture, relationship architecture, where we can leverage opportunities. I want to feel the best of everything. I don't really care where it comes from. Right now, we don't create, I think of acquisition programs should have catcher's mitts where I don't care if it comes from a lab, a small business, somebody else. If there's an improvement, we can speed line that in. We don't kind of have an architectural stymie right now. That's pretty hard to do, but it's not undoable. Those are maybe off the top of my head, top 3.
All right, so let me go back to this because we've really touched on this theme of there are a number of groups out there that are really accelerating on tech discovery. And so I would say over the past 5 years, there's been a proliferation of innovation hubs or innovation, whatever you want to call them. Within DoD, there's DIU and Ensign. Within the Navy, there's OTA Consortia, there's Naval X, and there's the tech hubs. Army, there's the biggest of all of them, Army Futures Command, my old command. And Air Force has AFWorks, Air Force Ventures, Wright Brothers. That list leaves out about 100. I can't touch all 150 of them today. But my real question on all these is there's goodness across these, but from your view, is there cross communication? Is there collaboration between the two? And for industry partners, how can they get their mind wrapped around so many different entry points?
Yeah, I mean, again, I could talk hours on this. I won't bore everybody with it. So I think it's, having too many is better than having not enough. But we do have to get to some rationalization. And again, I think you have to look at them each differently. You know, a lot of folks when I came to the Navy were like, okay, Hondo, you came up with SoftWorks, you know, then there's AFWorks, are you going to have a Navy Works? The challenge in the Navy was different. Our challenge was, and what I think is really, you know, the penultimate competitive advantage is the ability to learn and learn at scale. And so if you look at what we tried to do in Naval X, it was a little less of innovation hub. It was really all about how do we connect ourselves to ourselves and then create surface areas so we can operate at network speed. You know, Navy's a big thing, right? I'm everywhere from seabed to space. 20 different warfare centers, a very disaggregated buying command. We don't have a material command or a futures command. And if you're not careful, everybody's trying to do everything. And if you're a person out there with an idea or a product, you have no idea how to get to the right person to talk to. So for us on Naval X, it was more about creating a fabric to get the right idea to the right person, and almost think of it like super connectors so we can kind of operate at network speed. I think we need to have that mindset continue to grow so that, you know, if a great idea walks into anywhere, there's an affiliation between those different networks that then it can get to the right spot. And then there's some network unique things that each will do differently. You know, with SoftWorks, the problem they're trying to solve is maybe different than the Navy. But I guess what's given me optimism is there are now forums coming together. Those groups are all getting together. They're starting to deconflict. They are, you know, we built kind of tech bridges as a way to bring lots of diverse communities together into one spot. So, you know, it's kind of one-stop shopping in an area. I think that will be our continued future. But that's not enough. We've also got to then work the tie-in from those to the programs, because that's where the resources are and that's where deployment lives. And so then we've got to hook in an ability for something discovered in one of those places to have a rapid means and efficient means to get into a program activity and then feel that scale. And again, at least that's what we're working hard on. I'm spending a lot more time working on phase 3 SBIRs and phase 1 SBIRs for the Department of Navy, because that's to me scale. And I think the Navy over the last couple of years, you know, 55% I think of the DoD phase 3 SBIRs were Navy, because that's where we see scale. Because our challenge is not as much discovering things, it's being able to scale them and get them in the field. So that's where we're, at least from the Department of Navy, putting emphasis. Over.
Great. And certainly from industry's perspective, you know, and all of these tech hubs are great from the perspective of we get to meet someone like yourself or the 4-star, and then we also get to meet the folks working at the low level. The problem is the people with the money are the PMs. That's the people that we want to be, right? Show me the money. Where are the PMs at? So I'm going to give you one in the super weeds, because I happen to know that of all the executives, you will have a different answer than most of them. And so the question comes from John St. John, who I believe is a former ACAT 1 program manager, Army. I believe he's industry now. And St. John says, would you support an ACAT 1 program manager serving as an agreements officer for the purposes of OTAs? He believes that program managers with that level of responsibility have the skills and experiences to act as an agreements officer for the purpose of OTA.
Yeah, I guess I'll tell you what we're doing in the Navy. I'm not sure I would want my ACAT 1 PM being the OTA agreements officer. I would want folks on his team. So the Navy's, we've already got policy in place. We have agreements officers who are not warranted contracting officers. We've been piloting that. We've been using that. I think that needs to be much lower in the food chain than the ACAT 1 PM. I mean, at one time, somebody offered to give me a contracting warrant, which would have been the biggest mistake in the world. And luckily, I suppressed my urge to do that. But I do believe there are opportunities for, you know, I'm an abundance thinker. And if one of our most limited things right now are contracting officers, what are we asking our contracting officers to do that is not something only they can do? Where are they wasting time and energy as opposed to putting their time on that? So, one of my kind of 4Ds has been differentiate the work and then put the right level of talent on the job. Because when, folks say, well, we should take more risk. I don't want to just generically take more risk. That's kind of silly. What I do want to do is I want to take the risk appropriate for the task. And what happens if you have that wrong, then we apply way too many resources on something that doesn't have risk. And then we starve those resources from something that does. So, if we have the same number of contracting officers and buyers working a $100,000 CIBR as a $100 million mod, great. We'll have an awesome CIBR that has, lower risk of not going well. And then we'll have more risk on the thing that if it goes wrong is going to be really impactful. So when I think of this, it's not that I don't value contracting officers' capabilities, and absolutely they can be great agreements officers, but they're a limited quantity and we need to keep them focused. If there are some places with appropriate level of risk and we've got acquisition professionals trained appropriately, we should leverage that because in my mind, my best contracting officers were about 70% contracts, 20% PM, and about 10% finance. And my best PMs were about 70% PM and about 20% contracting officers, about 10% financial. So again, back to this mutual respect, that's where we've got to drive. And if we can do that, that starts opening up abundance all over the place. So I think absolutely that's appropriate with the right training and management controls like we do everywhere else. I'm not sure I'd make that the ACAT 1 PM.
All right, fair enough. All right, so I know we're coming right up on time, and I want to get one more question. I will provide one comment on your last response is, if you're in industry and the CEO was pushing your paper, your shareholders would not be very happy with you. So they're on both sides of the equation. You have to be putting the right talent against the right level of work, right? By the way, the government would also not be reimbursing you for that work.
Yeah, and that's why decentralization is so important. I mean, one, it's important because you can operate, at parallel speed, not serial speed. And heaven forbid everybody's relying on my brain housing group to make decisions. I mean, that is certainly a recipe for failure. But the more important reason that, I say decentralized to the lowest, I'm going to underline capable level. Decentralizing to people who are not capable of the task you're giving them is reckless. So when I say decentralized to lowest capable, well, you as a leader or as a mentor or a peer need to be training those folks so that they are more capable. But the way we all learn is by failing. I mean, I failed so many times I can't even count it. And luckily I learned most of that when I was young and my failure didn't put at risk lives or mission or outcomes. And so by really pressing down and decentralizing, you're teaching teams and people how to make decisions when you can afford for them to learn. Because the first time you've actually made the decision is as a unlimited warrant contracting officer on an MDAP or as a ACAT 1 PM, that's not where I want you to learn how to make good decisions, right? But if you have no authority to make decisions until you get there, that's where you're going to learn how to make decisions. So that's why this idea of decentralizing to the lowest capable level, what does it also get you? Empowered workforce, inspired workforce. Then as a leader, you got to give them tools and differentiate the work. And then you hold them accountable for picking the right tool for the right job. That's what gives me optimism is we're starting to value all of that. And when you do that, if you create the workplace of choice, you get to pick the best workers. As the DoD becomes this place, we won't have a talent drain because folks want to come here. Folks will be empowered. They can go make a difference for their nation. And so, again, I think that's why all of this is much more important than just what's the process of the day as we go forward.
All right, so we're at time, but as any good moderator will do, I'll still fire one last question at you. and you can choose how long to answer it. But I think let's bring it back up to the top level. I think we got a good question from Ryan Connell, who I know is at the DCMA commercial items group. So he's working on how to change things to be more commercial. But he asked more of a broad question, which is the environment, is the acquisition environment, is the threat environment today new? You've been doing this for 30 years. Is this a new environment? Or are we just recycling again? How do you feel about today's environment?
Yeah, I think, the environment's always going to be changing. I laugh a little bit about, we now are talking about having, experts in software program management. And at one point, we used to have a DOEA certification in software management, a trillion years ago. So, there's a little adage of, nobody ruins a good war story as somebody who's been there. But I think what is new, or what is available to us if we have the courage to take it, is an ability for everybody to shape the future. And if we can deliver outcomes, then we can shape whatever it is, oversight or regulation and all that. And what's given me the most encouragement is people aren't asking me anymore permission to go do things. And relying on having, me in a job, or a Will Roper in a job, or a Bruce Getty in a job. It's become much more organic. And, organizations kind of are like big pieces of plastic. You apply some management heat and they'll bend. But when that heat leaves, if you're not careful, they'll snap right back. What allows me to be, smile in the mirror every morning is when I think of a Bernice or an Ann or a Ben. They're not doing this because Hondo said it was a good idea, or because Will said it was a good idea, or because we stood up a futures command. And quite frankly, they aren't asking my permission to go do it. They're just going and doing it. They may let me know when I'm getting in the way of them. And so the future is ours. Don't give leadership too much authority to go change it, or Congress, or all this other stuff. Most of our obstacles are self-inflicted and culturally reinforced. That means if we can get through our self-inflicted nature and get the culture which thrives on diversity and rewards on talent, and is all about bringing, what do you bring to the team, not what color is your skin, or what, where you grew up, or you're in uniform, or whatnot. If we can get past all of that, just think what we can do as a team for our nation. And I'm starting to see that not as let's have an exception of getting people together who are diverse that we might be able to get some. It's now happening. You just got to get dinosaurs like us, to go block for you and hit the right person on the line so you can run through. So as we go through a transition of government and we go through all the changes, we're always going to have change. Back to the previous question. That's always the threat. The threat changes, the political environment changes, the contract buzzword of the day changes. That doesn't really matter if we have the right talent in the right culture focused on the right things. Because with the right talent focused on the right things in a safe and one that really leverages learning diversity, we'll just adapt and overcome whatever that challenge brings, and then we'll seize on the new opportunity that's there. Without it, we're not going to get there. So I guess my word is I'm, T-minus 7 days from whatever happens to me on the 20th, is don't let this be about a person. Don't let this be about a buzzword or a contract vehicle or stuff. It's so much more than that. And then whether you're in industry, whether you're in small business, academia, consortium, whatever, you have a part to play in our nation's defense. And I need you. Our nation needs you to do that, no matter who's in the seat. And you're going to hear from 3 leaders that are knocking it out of the park. And I sleep very well at night knowing they're on point here, taking it to the next level. So again, Ben, thanks for everything. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you guys and be amongst you.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. I can't think of a better way to leave it than the future is ours. If you take anything out of that, the future is ours is a great way to lead this. So on behalf of Public Spend Forum, NDIA, Women in Defense, I'd like to thank Secretary Geurts for taking the time out of his schedule to come and provide us with some of those finer points at the top level, at the weed level, and the future is ours is a great way to leave it.
All right, guys, rock on. I'll be watching in envy and with great admiration.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so we heard from Secretary Geurts, and now we're going to hear from 3 other leaders in our panel this afternoon. So I would like to reintroduce you to our panel speakers. And so we heard a little bit about them at the beginning, but just so you know a little bit more about them, we're going to start with Michelle Hodges. Michelle is the Senior Contracting Official for the Army Rapid Capabilities and Critical Technologies Office, affectionately known as RCTO. One of the worst, I don't know, acronyms to say, unfortunately. But the RCTO serves to expedite critical capabilities to the field to meet combatant commanders' needs. What you're going to find out about Michelle and the RCTO is that it's a very unique organization. So if you're not familiar with this customer organization, they are very unique in the structure. Michelle Hodges served as Chief of Army Contracting Command, Aberdeen Proving Ground, Belvoir Division from 2015 to 2018, where she supported the program executive offices for Belvoir, including a number of them. Prior to that, she was a branch chief and contracting officer at ACC APG. She holds her MBA from George Washington University, BA in management from James Madison, and we are very excited to have Michelle Hodges present. So Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that kind introduction. So yes, I'm from RCTO. It's much easier to say. Once you embrace the RCTO, you can just go with it. So it took a little bit, but RCTO is here to stay. So thank you so much for putting this together at Public Spend Forum, NDIA, and Women in Defense. My fellow panelists, I'm excited to be here. We've had a lot of fun putting this together. So let's get into it. Next slide, please. So RCTO is a unique program office. We are set up solely to deliver experimental prototypes with residual combat capability. Our portfolio includes both strategic outcomes that you see on the left and hypersonics, directed energy, and mid-range capabilities, as well as some critical outcomes that are lesser known. So we're supporting counter small UAS, working with the Joint Counter Small UAS Office under General Gainey in the Army. We have a computing and electronic security dominance division that works on a lot of cyber projects. We have a tech scouting piece called the Advanced Concepts and Experimentation. So if you're familiar with our innovation days, that was run out of that group. And then finally, we have our Rapid Acquisition Prototyping Office, which does the prototyping for things that don't fit in these other buckets. So while we're widely known really for the long-range hypersonic weapon and probably some of the directed energy platforms, I want you to know what we do scales across the board. Wherever the Army wants us to go, we're able to go based on our structure. Next slide, please. So like I said, the long-range hypersonic weapon is probably our most widely known project that we're working on. It was the first one that we were assigned once the RCTO was chartered in 2018. So in February 2019, we got the mission to deliver a prototype battery of this weapon system no later than the fourth quarter of 2023. So you have this idea, right? It really didn't exist. The glide bodies were being assembled by PhDs at Sandia National Labs. That's where it existed. And we're now going to deliver this, put it in the hands of soldiers, let them push the button in 2023. So our total requirement that we got from the Army was to deliver this battery. No more, no less. It was like one sentence long. The SEC Army signed the letter and we were off and running. We're doing that in 4 years, unheard of. Let's add our partners. So you'll see the common hypersonic glide body. That common means it's common across the DoD. The Navy's designing it, the Army's producing it. So we're working that in that joint environment. We're working the Navy's responsible for the all-up round and canister joint development so that works on the Navy ships and it also works on air ground launch in the Army. We're creating that battery operations center and the transporter erector launcher. Those didn't exist. We're able to pull those together from items that were in the Army inventory. So you're not starting from zero, but you are piecing together these things that existed and using them in a very different way. So how can we do it? Next slide, please. So really what's special about the RICTO is our org structure. I mean, there's a lot of ways to technically get things done, but when you look at how we're able to do it in those timelines, it's our alignment. So we take our missions directly from this board of directors that has the senior leaders on the civilian side and the uniform side of the Army. So it's the Sec Army, the Chief of Staff, the Under, the Vice, Dr. Jetty as the ASALT and the Army Acquisition Executive, and then General Murray as the Commanding General of Futures Command. So what does that do for us? It gives us our acquisition authority and requirements authority from this one group. And you see in the bottom left, the little pie chart shows where that overlaps and where RICTO is able to play into that and then act based on those authorities that exist. The other thing that we do right up front, and you heard Honorable Geurts talking about it, right, is how can we transition this and make sure it actually gets delivered? Even though we're focused on the prototype delivery, we're thinking about how the Army can do this in the long term. So we set up this octagon because there's 8 of them, and it goes across the entire spectrum. So how can the Army institutionalize this in the future through doctrine, staffing, the training, the leadership? Obviously we're doing the material, the personnel, what unit's going to, what facility needs to be constructed, and if there's any different policies that need to be put in place so that the Army can use these at large. Next slide, please. So the things that we work on, I just want to explain a little bit the modernization continuum. And you heard, again, Honorable Geurts talk about it. We're really good at discovery. So if you start on the left, you're developing this idea and a concept. I mean, this kid is drawing a picture of this rocket ship that he sees in his mind, right? And then the Army takes it through the lab system. You're doing inventions, demonstrations, and then at some point you actually want to try it out. And that's really where RICTO comes in, is we can take what's coming out of the lab, look at it, quickly put it together, test it out, put it through the ringer, and give the Army a decision point for the future before we hand it off to the program executive office if they want to do this at scale. And so in between those 2 decision points, 2 and 3, is really where RICTO shows that value, the value to the Army between Futures Command and the program executive offices. Next slide, please. So how do we overcome that valley of death? And it's picking those right projects, those ones that are coming out of the labs that you see on the left. And so traditionally what the lab provides you doesn't necessarily match up with what a PEO needs to move forward in the acquisition process. You're getting hardware that you know is usable, but it's in the lab environment. There's no data packages to go with it. You can't put it out in the competitive marketplace. So the PEO gets it and they're like, well, I can't compete this, I have to start over. And then they go through this another whole long developmental cycle. What we're able to do with RICTO, and in the middle, it looks like an Easter egg, is because we've pulled all these pieces together. We pull in the science and technology office, the engineers who have been supporting the technology all along. We pull in our industry partners and wherever it comes from, and we put them together. So in our office, we have the engineers. We embed our industry team. They attend all of our meetings with us, from our staff meetings, our routine, just, hey, what's going on, as well as the program management reviews. We pull in the testers, designing the tests that the systems will go under to make sure that they're safe and suitable for use. We bring in ATEC, we embed the contracting team, and then we wrap them with acquisition professionals. And that's the core competency that the RICTO provides, is to make sure there's acquisition rigor going on with these prototyping. In addition, from day one, we have members from the program executive offices sitting in the space as well. So that's our transition and fielding teams. So they're setting the conditions to make sure those prototypes can be in place with the units and be used and do those good demonstrations and leave behind capability, but also start writing whatever is going to be needed for them to enter into an acquisition program in the future, whether that's a full ACAT 1 package or if that's a middle tier acquisition. They are working that before we even deliver the first prototype so that they're ready to catch it when it's ready to go. So you can go to the next slide, please. So We talked about the right projects, selecting the ones that are ready to be prototyped. We talked about having senior leader support, and that's through the Army BOD. And then you talked about having the right people together. So pulling those right skill sets together, making sure they're empowered to make the decisions that they need. We share metrics with the industry partners. So there's not government metrics and industry metrics. I want to know how those industry partners are measuring their program, because that's really important to me and what the success is going to be. We've even managed to stay on schedule across all of our projects, even through COVID with their design. We have in place a lot of telework, but we've also implemented a lot of staggered work schedules to make sure we stay on schedule. We are currently building equipment to be fielded. I mean, the RICTO setup, we're delivering new capability to the field starting in 2020 all the way to 2024. So we can't stop, but what we had to do was modify our working relationships, and all the teams have done a great job with that. The last thing I wanted to leave you with is kind of what's next, right? So we have those projects that we're currently working on, and they're on schedule and they're on path to deliver. The next one you'll see this week, RFI being posted for a counter small UAS demo at UMR Proving Ground in April. So be on the lookout for that. And I hope that we can see you out there. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Michelle. So RICTO, very interesting organization. Next time I want a little more enthusiasm when you say stuff from the labs. It should be like, yes,
Sorry.
stuff from the labs. That's awesome.
It works exactly the way I need it to when I get it.
Yes, we love the labs. We want to celebrate stuff from the labs.
Look, I do. So I'll just share a quick story, but a lot of what I did quickly was prepping for Afghanistan. So what the night vision lab had ready to go was a lot of route clearance equipment that we took from the lab that I was buying under BAAs and under GUONs and urgent contracting actions, put out in the theater within about 6 months. I do love the lab, but they were overconfident sometimes.
Yes, we love the labs. We love the labs. You don't need TDPs. Don't worry about that. The labs will make good stuff. All right. So thank you, Michelle. And we'll have time for questions for Michelle afterwards. I want to move quickly on to our next panelist, Anne Laurent. Anne Laurent, as she was introduced earlier, is the head of NCMA's National Contract Management Association's Professional Practice and Innovation, where she's the director. She spent more than 30 years leading analysis and reporting on federal acquisition. She created the NCMA Acquisition Innovators Hub webpage and the monthly innovations column in Contract Management Magazine, which I have a copy here. She curates the Acquisition Innovators Weekly, an online newspaper, and she also founded the Acquisition Innovators Hub, an online forum, weekly newsletter, and information source. In addition to a federal acquisition map, which we'll hear about a little bit later, which hopefully will tie in some of those 150 things I mentioned earlier, which I didn't have time to go through them all, RICTO being one of them. Anne has been a National Academy of Public Administration Fellow for over 20 years. So without further ado, Anne, take it away.
Gosh, that makes me sound so old, Ben. Thank you so very much, everybody, for having us, and for WID and NDIA for putting on this event. I was, you had me at Hondo. It was great to have him, and I'm just, blown away to follow Michelle and to follow Hondo. Part of my job at the National Contract Management Association is to help keep contracting professionals current on acquisition innovation. So sometimes I do write for the magazine Contract Management, which you can see on the slide right now, the July issue of. And today I want to take you inside one of the stories in that issue of the magazine for what I believe to be a real life example of Mamba Acquisition. So I'm going to disappear myself and let you focus on the pictures. Could we have the next slide? Think back with me now to the beginning of 2020. Do you remember what happened on the aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt in those early and preciously unsuspecting days? The carrier's strike group deployed January 17th, when COVID-19 was seen as a problem only for China and the surrounding countries. Sure, the ship took some mitigation steps, bleaching surfaces, that sort of thing, twice a day. But the risk was considered so minimal that the Roosevelt made a port call to Vietnam on March the 5th. Next slide. Oops, I'm so sorry. Should have stayed with that one. U.S. Pacific Fleet leaders even flew into the ship for a 400-person reception in Vietnam, and 30 reporters were brought out to tour the carrier. But by March 24th, the first 3 Teddy Roosevelt sailors were diagnosed with COVID-19 and flown to quarantine on Guam. 2 days later, the carrier itself pulled into Guam, where you see it here. By April 1st, it had 93 positive cases. By April 14th, 950. In total, more than 1,200 sailors, that's about a quarter of the ship's crew and air wing, would contract COVID. Now, what if the Teddy Roosevelt had not been able to reach Guam due to weather, war, mechanical problems, or any of a myriad other reasons? More than 1,000 people would have needed to be airlifted without infecting the crews and the medical teams that were ferrying them to hospitals. But at the time, the only 2 biocontainment transport units available to all of the government would carry no more than 4 or 6 patients, respectively. And both types were in short supply. Now, next slide. The Air Force's Air Mobility Command anticipated the need to move those kinds of large numbers of COVID patients around the world. So in March, AMC ordered tests of a State Department 4-person isolation pod for use on the C-17. But by March 28th, the COVID crisis had become real. U.S. Transportation Command issued a Joint Urgent Operational Need Request, a JUON, for a higher capacity COVID transportation solution. The Air Force was tapped to lead, and its Agile Combat Support Program Executive Office got the call. Transcom wanted ability to transport up to 4,000 COVID-19 patients a month and at reasonable cost. The PEO first turned to a mothballed medical transport unit, the Transport in Isolation System. That's what's pictured here. It was developed during the 2014 Ebola outbreak, but fielded then stored, says Lieutenant Colonel Paul Hendrickson, who's an Agile Combat Support PEO material leader in chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defense systems branch of that. Next slide, please. Immediately, a cross-functional team deployed to Joint Base Charleston, South Carolina, to attempt to refurbish and field the TIS, but it could only practically fit 3 to 6 patients, and there also were operational limits to its use. So neither the TIS nor the PBCM had enough capacity, and both had more limited availability than the JUON required. To speed a new, bigger containment system into existence, Hendrickson enlisted a team from his branch and from across the Joint PEO for Seaborne Defense. In addition, he roped in, and I want you to listen to this in view of our conversation of collaboration, Air Mobility Command, Air Force Life Cycle Management Center, Transcom, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA, Air Force Operational Test and Evaluation Center, the 28th Test and Evaluation Squadron, the Air Force Medical Readiness Agency, the Air Force Research Lab, U.S. Army's Combat Capabilities Development Command, BEN, and academia. So here is their story. Yanisa, can we roll the video, please?
This is unlike anything we've ever seen in the Air Force. This is a rapid acquisition, prototype into possibly straight up operational effectiveness. This is a crazy effort.
We had a concept available called a negatively pressurized Connex. It was taking a prefabricated 40-foot ISO container, adding in a negatively pressurized system, which is a tried and true technology to keep viruses out, and then putting it on a C-17.
So what we've done here is we've taken a box, we've negatively pressurized it. That way any bioorganisms that an individual may be infected with remain within that box and will not leak outside. So now we can transport these patients from a more remote area to better medical care without potentially contaminating the air crew, the aircraft, or the caregivers who are trying to assist on the way. So we have it outfitted for 28 C-17 seats, or you could fold up some of the seats and instead put in litters.
It also has the capacity to hold up to 8 people on litters and any combination thereof. It's also configured to safely carry the aeromedical teams so that they can wear their personal protective equipment and also exit the Connex after donning and doffing so that they can get the rest and relief they need on these long flights. We're looking at 4 different criteria. Number 1, can it contain the virus? Number 2, is it usable for the aeromedical teams that will be executing the mission? Number 3, can it be certified to be airworthy? And number 4, will it be safe to fly? So if we can answer those 4 criteria, we'll be able to move forward with a phase 2, which is procuring the production prototype assets, and hopefully we'll have capability on the ground of the warfighter in 30 days. So the context of this was rapid procurement, and so we based it on easily available technologies with an integration challenge. So currently forecasted is the company, as designed, should be able to produce these at the rate of about 4 every 15 days.
So a total of 1 month, we went from an idea that was just a drawing on a piece of paper I did to an actual final product in which we're going to submit the paperwork to US Transcom as a solution to then procure more of these.
Taking a concept on a piece of paper less than a month ago to actually having iron on the ramp to test is a testament to the hard work that everyone's put forward. From our engineering teams to the aircraft SPOs to the test and evaluation community, and we cannot look past the work that Delta Flight Products, UTS, and HEI have put in, pulling 24/7 shifts to basically build something from a concept to something that can actually be tested and produced in such a short period of time is incredible to speak to what this means to everyone on the project.
They're really moving at the speed of light, at the speed of relevance. We've all come together and they've been a fantastic support team to myself during a time like this. I've never seen so much effort go into pushing a product that can be used to save lives and meet what the Air Force needs.
Next slide, please. So let me take you behind the scenes of that video now. What you see here is, in fact, the famous Captain Tadaro's drawing on a piece of paper. The backstory on the Connex is that Hendrickson's team had been working with the 51st Aircraft Maintenance Squadron at Osan Air Base in Korea. Turns out that air maintainers need to get some rest and relief when they're in a seaburn environment from wearing that chembio gear all the time. So they have to have a place to take refuge, to take it off and get some rest before they rejoin the fight. They were going to be demonstrating a Connex to use for that purpose. So Hendrickson reached out to the person who was the Collective Protection Program Manager at the time, who was Captain Alexis Tadaro, you saw there, and she sketched out the negatively pressured Connex that you heard about on the video. Next slide, please. Getting from Tadaro's sketch, however, to the actively working negatively pressurized Connex took overnight work sessions, a coalition of willing functional and technical experts, and the boldness to stretch an unorthodox buying authority to the outer limits of its speed and its flexibility. On this slide, you can see the beginning of that evolution. Next slide, please. Hendrickson says of the whole process, the number of levers we had to move was phenomenal. Next slide, please. First off, Hendrickson and Tadaro, who became the NPC program manager, contacted the joint project manager for seaburn protection with the idea for this NPC. He then connected them with a guy by the name of Joe Novick. He's a product manager for seaburn protection at JPO Seaburn Defense in Stafford, Virginia, and Melanie Haney, who's a contract acquisition specialist and works pretty closely with Novik. He had handled in the past a number of urgent decontamination requirements, so he became Tadaro's deputy on the project. And Lieutenant Colonel Hendrickson credits Melanie Haney with being the project's contracting ninja. Next slide, please. Novik recommended they use a prototype other transaction agreement through Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Consortium to accomplish creating a prototype of the NPC. The CWMD consortium was established by the Joint Program Executive Office for Chemical and Biological Defense, and it's managed by Advanced Technology International, the largest consortium manager for other transaction agreements serving the United States government. Melanie Haney once worked at CWMD, and that gave her the experience to make the OT wheels turn, according to Hendrickson. Why another transaction agreement? Well, Novik says, we were trying to rapidly prove a concept to meet urgent needs, and an OT agreement seemed like the perfect solution. Because OTs are prototyping based, you don't have to go through the very stringent rules in the Federal Acquisition Regulation. We were able to make decisions during tests to get what the user really wanted. Next slide, please. Novik also noted that OTs offer flexibility when you don't have very hard, very high level requirements. That made them perfect for the NPC, which he said was a bunch of smart people figuring out the requirements on a weekend. Now, you heard in the video about the speed of this project. Henderson says the team put together the requirements in a single weekend over teleconferences. Just on that Saturday alone, the team spent hours and hours on a telecon with 30 engineers, aeromedical experts for Air Mobility Command, and other experts all the way across the country. The consortium, CWMD, issued a draft request for white papers on March 30th after phone meetings with vendors. The final request for white papers was released March 31st, with responses due April 2nd. The OT was awarded in 7 days. Next slide, please. The OT selection team spent 3 days nonstop vetting each white paper and in negotiations. As they were doing that, others on the team were finding the funding and getting it approved so it could be put on a purchase request. Contracting, budgeting, finance, source selection, and subject matter experts worked extra hours, and with the challenges of telecommuting. And that Henderson says that our dedicated contractors worked around the clock to build the systems. Communications were degraded, email went down, but despite it all, we made it work. As you see here, the winning team was Delta Flight Products, a subsidiary of Delta Airlines, and two small businesses, Highland Engineering, Inc., of the great state, my home state of Michigan, go blue, and UTS Systems, LLC. Next slide. That's important because OTs must go to non-traditional or small suppliers, or if they go to traditional contractors, must have significant participation by non-traditionals or small business.
This is I think this is a great opportunity to talk about, with the consortia, the non-traditionals, the number of other companies that had to contribute to this project is exactly where we want to transition to talk about the map so that people can understand what all these things are. So I'll give you the final note.
Okay. Give me the next slide. As you can see there, the prototype was successful and it fit inside of a C-17 safely. So it met all four of Hendrickson's conditions. It took only 14 days from the agreement on the design to produce the NPC prototype. They also produced, next slide, NPC Light to fit on a C-130 so they could get out to forward operating bases, C-130 being a smaller plane, and get people out of those locations, austere locations safely. Next slide. And on April 30th, 2020, following the successful proof of concept, the Air Mobility Command agreed to proceed with the rapid acquisition of the NPC and NPC Light, both purchased on the same other transaction agreement. So that's a draft request for white papers on March 30 and rapid acquisition beginning on April 30 for those of you playing at home.
Yeah, and
What you're looking at here is the actual NPC in use. for the very first time on July the 1st last year to transport 12 COVID patients evacuate them from CENTCOM area of operations and take them to Ramstein so that they could be treated at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. Thank you for the video. I think folks were asking for the link for it. That is a true story of collaboration. And we saw all the government groups involved. We saw industry groups involved right from the outset. That's how you collaborate a requirement. That's how you execute. And so with that theme, I want to move on to Bernice, our final panelist here, speaker at this point. And Bernice is the newly named Vice President of Strategic Programs of 912. I've known Bernice for quite a while now in the OTA space, OTA consortium space, and the general defense innovation space. Bernice has a number of roles that I won't get into. And she's sitting in a very amazing innovation space in Hawaii today, which is a pretty cool looking innovation space. But the purpose of Bernice, what you're going to present, I think is very important for this audience, which is, okay, we've heard about all these different innovation groups. I asked Hondo about it. We have Michelle from the RICTO and just talked about OTA Consortia. But from industry's perspective, where do I get involved? Where do I start? What are all these things? What do they buy? What don't they buy? And I'm very interested to hear your perspective on it and maybe a new tool that folks can use.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to jump into it without referencing everything I'd like to reference with Anne and with Michelle and with you, Ben, and Hondo, but to say that this map was really an outgrowth of a conversation that Anne Laurent and I had, a number of conversations when we were seeing OTAs and other organizations from the government seeking the same technology at the same time using different outreach methods. And so going back to what Hondo talked about in terms of creating fabric where you could capture whatever industry was developing as a solution and feed it immediately to different entities seeking the same thing. That was actually the start of what we call the map. I'm going to walk through it rather briefly because I know we're limited in time, but I also wanted to highlight that a counter to the map, because map's not the only tool, is GovShop, which is with Public Spend Forum. And that's a very unique real-time tool by which government can identify companies who have the resources and the solutions that they need. So I'm going to jump into the map though, however, to give you an idea. Thank you. So this was really developed to present to industry in particular, also to government and also to large defense contractors, but especially to the non-traditionals, this federal market. And the federal market overarchingly, we know, is a large ecosystem. What we were looking at were these very complex interconnected systems. Our focus is just on the federal innovation acquisition portion of it. In other words, where does the federal government seek innovation and have contracting vehicles and challenges and other ways to reach industry? When we look at that subsystem, then what the map really was designed to show companies was what were the sources of the funds? Because oftentimes when you look at programs, if you're not familiar with the sponsors, you're not able to anticipate changes in the different types of innovation that will come out of those sources. So sources of funds we thought were very important to show how they were connected to the actual arms that reached out to industry. We wanted to show contracting offices because that's really a point of entry for most companies. But we also wanted to show technical evaluators, market research teams, because those are the ones that you can, industry can access early before requirements are finalized. And the most important group, which are the user groups. Ultimately, many entrepreneurs will feel like they have the perfect product, but they may not understand the user who is working in an extreme environment and is under combat conditions, for example. And we felt that that was very important to also show. Industry outreach programs and connectors are other parts of this program. If we could go to the next slide. So that's what we were hoping to identify and make clear to companies. And so we also wanted to show them the different rapid contracting options, what were just discussed, other transaction authorities, commercial solution opportunities, SIBRs, especially as we were talking about earlier with Hondo and with Michelle, small business innovation research grants, especially phase 3s, which are kind of the fielding element of the SIBR programs. That's when you're getting into actually taking the prototypes into the field. And many innovation funding sources and hubs, as we were talking about earlier. Other parts of the ecosystem that we felt important to capture in this market were the multiple requests for similar proposals. So again, we go back to what Ann and I first saw as ripe opportunity for efficiency. And what we were hoping, and this is kind of sidebar here, I had this very Pollyanna-ish idea that perhaps all of the different tribes that were looking, government agencies that were looking for the same or similar technologies might share market research, for example, or might be able to dovetail their requests so that they weren't going out at different times or exactly the same time to industry. And I think Trusted Microelectronics was one of the bigger programs where we saw that happening almost at the same time across services. And so the hope is, and the reason why I'm foot stomping this is the hope is that there will be some programs that, and to create sort of that fabric that Hondo was talking about, to actually create efficiencies on the government side when they're seeking these opportunities to leverage our tax dollars to be more efficient. We looked at overlapping priorities, that there are many technical interest areas that are covered by overlapping other transaction authorities or programs. And we also looked at the phenomenon of large contractors seeking small companies as leads into, for example, OTAs. Okay, if we could go to the next one, please. We were looking at then also capturing these different players in the innovation ecosystem, the enablers, the funders, user groups, contract managers, technical leads, the program executive offices, the legal leads, and the small business advocates, because they all seem like government to industry, but they all have very distinct roles, and it can be frustrating if you think you're talking to government who can buy something and you realize 3/4 of the way down the road that they actually either don't have the money or they don't have the contracting vehicle or the procurement strategy. So really important to understand who you're talking to. We wanted to show labs and federally funded research organizations that can provide part of the solutions for companies to partner with in many cases, or at least to know what is already being developed by government rather than duplicating that innovation. We also really wanted to hit hard the many aggregators of federal resources. There are some fabulous programs that everyone here, I'm sure, is very familiar with, but a newbie, a non-traditional coming into this ecosystem can be really overwhelmed by seeing AFWorks, SoftWorks, DefenseWorks, NavalX, and not necessarily understand their role as aggregators of these federal programs and funds. We wanted to show innovation support hubs, and we also wanted to show multiple OTA consortia. Go to the next one. So briefly, before we dive into the map and you can actually see it, the 3 major user groups that we were addressing through this map were government, where we were hoping they would use the map to actually search for technology that's being covered by these different innovation hubs and identify where there might be some overlapping priorities with what they're doing and possibly share market research or possibly even co-fund efforts. And also government to be able to really understand their own ecosystem, because oftentimes this ecosystem development has happened so quickly that entities, entire service groups might not have their arms completely around all of the assets that they have to bring to bear. Then we looked at innovators. how we could help them navigate this complex ecosystem and really evaluate true funding opportunities. There's so many times when we would talk to companies who had gone to trade shows and they would be approached by someone in uniform who expressed great interest in their technology, and they would think, I have a funding opportunity, I'm going to sell X number of units of these, without really understanding sometimes those true funding opportunities, what was interest versus what was a contract opportunity. And even with OTAs, there's always this question of, is this teed up for someone already, or is this really an open opportunity? So we were hoping that through the map, they could see and compare and contrast these different avenues. For large contractors, we're also kind of a litmus test for them. They have entire groups within their organizations who really specialize in knowing who's who in the zoo in terms of the federal world. But even they were having difficulty keeping up with the rapidly changing environment and ecosystem network. And also, we were looking for ways that they could identify innovators for teaming. And that's something that we felt would be important at some point in the development of the map. So next slide, we're then saying, so how can they access this ecosystem right now? So these are just barriers. I won't go through each one of them, but the main thing was that there are multiple barriers, and we felt that navigating the ecosystem with a map would be the first step. I'd like to take you now into the next several, we can go to the next one, the Federal Innovation Ecosystem Map. So this is really a very high level overview, a static view of what is an interactive map. And when you go to the website, you actually see a search function, and you can search by technology area, you can search by service, you can search by keywords. But I wanted to give you an overview just to give you an idea of that ecosystem. You'll see on the right the different federal agencies that are included in this, and what we're mapping is their innovation funding opportunities and their industry outreach nodes that tie to each of those federal agencies. So that's color coded, and what you'll see as we dive into it more closely is that each of those nodes is represented by the symbol of their federal agency. It's their logo. And then branching off from those centers of funding are their different types of outreach organizations, ranging from laboratories to consortia to accelerators, et cetera. So now I'm gonna take you on to the next slide, please. In the next slide, we decided we would highlight Michelle. And Michelle, I have a very soft spot in my heart for RCCTO, because my son was one of those, he's 82nd Airborne, and he was one of those route clearers. And night vision innovation is extremely important. He just came back from his first deployment in Afghanistan. And it was an eventful one. And so really, really appreciated everything coming out of your office that was fielded very quickly. In this case, using the map, what you see is the ability to click on what you'll see in the upper, slightly left part of the map. You'll see the office itself with a red ring around it. That means that we've searched for a technology area, or we've searched for that specific office. We've clicked on it. What you'll see in the interactive mode of it is on the left-hand side, an actual description that's provided by each of the organizations listed publicly. So this is all publicly available information that describes not only what they do, but if we can go to the next slide, it also, as you scroll down, hanging on to the same office, you'll see on the left-hand side, as you scroll through, the description that's linked directly to those buttons. Not only FedBizOps links, or we'll have some other ones there that will show you the current requests for solutions, but also areas of interest, technology areas of priority, and perhaps one of the more important pieces is, who the funder is and what branch they are and their actual website. So the idea is that you can click on any organization. And again, you'll see these symbols in the middle of those circles on the right. You'll see anything that has a lightning bolt is an accelerator. The organizations that are innovation development organizations have like an asterisk. You'll see consortia with multiple people together. So that's what each of the symbols represents. And again, you can search by technology area or office or by actual functionality. Let's go to the next one, if we will. Next is homage to Hondo and the Navy innovation ecosystem within itself. This is a deep dive into an example of Navy innovation. If you were to click on any of those buttons, it would take you to the same sort of in-depth description, but you could also search across them to see who's currently seeking innovation in a specific technology. Sensors, for example, within Navy, you can search by multiple variables so that you can hone in, or you can search across the federal innovation map for who's seeking more information. Let's go to the next one. And the next one just shows you a closer view. And I'm sorry, we're not able to do this in an interactive mode. So it's not as dynamic as I'd like it to be. But what you can see here are, again, all of those different consortia. You can see in this case, if you went deep, I'm like tempted to reach out to the screen and make it bigger, but anyway, you would be able to also hone in on individual entities. And I think we were just showing this as an example of the overview. We go to the next slide though. This is where we've used a very basic search query, which is for sensors. Who currently is providing funding for innovation in sensors? And this is part of the outcome. You'd have to actually scroll through this, but it gives you the organization, the name of it. If you clicked on the name, it would take you to that exact location on the map. So you could see where it fits in within its funding source and also relative to other entities that are funding or that are seeking the same technology, perhaps that are funding very similar innovation solutions across the federal government at the same time. The next slide, please. It will give you, for example, if you were to search OTAs, I'd like to see all the OTA consortia across the federal ecosystem. You would put in that inquiry and 45 or however many there are would pop up. And you could go either one at a time, or you could cross-reference and say, I just want to see those who focus again on sensors, or I'd like to see those that are just within the Army, etc. And so we wanted to make this, again, very interactive, easy to use, visually understandable, because it's such a complex and very crowded ecosystem. Again, the map is one tool. And as Hondo said, the whole point of being effective in this ecosystem is to be agile and to not hone in on just one solution at a time. So again, GovShop is a really great tool that is very focused on profiles that give you in-depth understanding of companies and vice versa. In terms of government agencies, there are many Sherpa who are guides. I had the great opportunity to work for C5BDI, which is an organization that really helps companies pivot and navigate their way through this by helping them prep materials, etc. There are, in other words, there are elements that help companies make their way through this very complex ecosystem. We hope the map is one of them that is useful. Again, it was one of those situations where, as Hondo said, you put a couple people together who are passionate about this stuff, and we were just bouncing these ideas. We didn't go to government for funding. We didn't go to government for permission. We did it. And we hope that we can continue to iterate it and make it useful. Again, dovetailing with other tools like GovShop and Sherpa like C5BDI to help folks navigate this very complex ecosystem.
All right. Thank you very much, Bernice. Thanks to everybody who stuck it out. I know we went long, but I think it was important to see, the tool isn't the important piece of the discussion. The important piece of the discussion was understand how diverse the entry points are. So if you're an industry partner and you're looking for where the pipeline started on some production that you're like, how did I miss that production? Well, it started at some weekend hackathon at a university and then went to a prize challenge and then went to a prototype OTA and then went into production. That's where you missed it. And so for the research environment and everything that's in the technology chain, you have to understand what the world of the new beginning of the pipeline is. And Bernice, I'm really excited about the map. I like to see how diverse it is. I like to see where I was in there during my time in my Army organizations. I should get bigger bubbles or something. I want to thank everybody. I know we went long. So NDIA, Women in Defense, Women in Defense Central Florida, Women in Defense Michigan. Shout out to you guys because I'm a member of Women in Defense Michigan. Bernice, Yanisa, Anne Laurent, Rachel, Michelle Hodges, and of course, Secretary Hondo Geurts. Thank you from everybody and for sticking it out. You can reach any of these folks on LinkedIn. Reach out to them if you have questions about anything that was discussed today, if you have follow-ups. You can email me at ben@publicspendforum.com and say, hey, nice job moderating that panel that went over 13 minutes today, jerk. That's okay too. I'm okay. I'll take those emails, but thank you very much and have a great afternoon.